Hey guys, it's Zach with Splitwood Studio again, and today's project is actually going to be for a coworker. His anniversary was coming up, and he had a bunch of wood for a project he'd bought a while back, and just never had the time to get around to it. And so with his anniversary coming up, he reached out to me and just asked if I had any time to be able to do this, and luckily my schedule was free. And so we worked out a design and I got working. He already had the material, like I said. And the shelf parts were already milled and glued. Everything was good with those. But we did decide that for the uprights, we wanted them a little bit thicker than the standard 3-inch that he had available. Luckily, he had a couple extra, so I just glued them together and turned it into 4.5-inch uprights, essentially. The material he had was poplar. And to be honest, this was one of my first experiences working with poplar other than a few floating shelves. And I am very surprised at how soft poplar is. I could not slide it across my tabletop without scratching or denting it. Sadly, that wasn't the worst part about this build. I'll get into that later. But it was the second worst part of the build, just how careful I had to be. I'm used to working with things more like maple or walnut that are pretty resilient. You can slide them around until they're in their finished state. You don't want to slide anything when it's that close to being finished, but this, it didn't matter when it was going to get scratched. And it was about when I was sanding that I found this out, and so luckily I had some microfiber towels that I could lay underneath. That way it wouldn't get scratched and I could continue to sand. But it took me one or two grits to figure that out. So as of right now, I've really only glued a couple slats together, milled them through the planer to clean up all of the glue and make sure that they're perfectly flat, and then prep sanded them up to 150, and I'll finish sanding them later. But before I do that, I want to rip it down to the 4-inch mark that we're going for. This was made pretty easy because of my outfeed table on my table saw cart is almost 8 feet. So it was really simple because these boards at this point were close to about 6 to 7 feet. The next step was the most confusing step, so hopefully with audio and video I'm able to make it clear enough what I was doing. But essentially, we wanted to use the festool domino for all of the joints to hold the shelves up so that nothing would be visible. And to start off, I laid everything out on my assembly table and used double-sided sticky tape after putting some measurements down and making sure everything was in place to make sure that the wood wouldn't move. Then I was able to use the track saw to trim off all of the angles and make sure that they were going to match perfectly. And once again, I had to make a lot of different measurements, but there was about 15 to 16 inches between shelves. And so I started with a 3-inch gap at the bottom, used this straight edge to be a guide for the domino. And then with that walnut piece you saw earlier, I made some marks on the shelves and the uprights. And using both of those, I was able to get the markings that I needed for the domino on the uprights and on the shelf to make sure that they lined up perfectly. I repeated this step for each shelf, and then after I finished the 5 shelves on these 2 uprights, I pulled them off and I redid the measurements for the uprights, but going in the opposite direction. And then I just repeated. On the opposite side of the shelf, I drilled the holes with the domino, and I drilled all the holes in the uprights. I was really happy with how well this turned out. I forgot to hit record when I was doing the dry fit, but everything fit together really smoothly. There were 2 that I decided to come back and widen just a little bit to make sure that they fit better. Before I could do the actual assembly, I needed to go through and stain and finish all of the parts. And so I went ahead and did some test colors. And once my coworker decided what he wanted, I went ahead and did the stain. I did try out polyurethane stain. Really disliked that. It did not work out very well. It was almost like trying to do paint. It was just so thick, and even after I watered it down a lot, just nothing was working out for me on that. But going back to regular stain and some Rubio Monocoat worked out great. After finishing, it came time for possibly the worst glue up of my life. And the biggest reason for that is that I spent the time to label all of the shelves, but I didn't label any of the uprights. Which, it seems like it wouldn't be that big of a deal. You just have to kind of figure out where they go with the shelf. But there's actually 24 different variations on which way it could be. And finding the correct variation took me an hour and a half on top of a half-hour glue up. And so it really shouldn't have been that difficult, but I learned my lesson to label every component when it comes to using the domino. to make sure that everything just goes as smoothly as possible when it comes time to assemble. Don't forget to let me know what you think about this bookshelf or to subscribe to see more videos like this in the future.